So CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane is in Washington following all the latest developments on this. Scott, good to see you again. What could happen today?
Well, this is the deadline that the former president alluded to when he said he got that target letter Sunday night from special counsel Jack Smith. The former president alleged that he had 4 days to respond to that target letter. Do the simple math in the back of the cocktail napkin, and this is 4 days later. And we know on Thursdays here in Washington, the grand jury investigating January 6th as part of this special counsel investigation tends to either hear from witnesses or do its business. So we're monitoring the courthouse and monitoring the movements of either the grand jurors or those who have some affiliation to the January 6 cases. That target letter referenced the names of the statutes and possible charges you just saw. A couple of them are worth underscoring. Obstruction of an official proceeding was part of that target letter, CBS News has learned. Obstruction of an official proceeding, Anne-Marie, sounds like a real arcane Justice Department phrase, but it's a violation of U.S. code that the Department of Justice has used more than 300 times in prosecuting January 6th riot defendants. They have developed quite a bit of muscle memory. That official proceeding they're alluding to was the January 6th electoral count here at the Capitol. There's quite a bit of precedent, Anne-Marie, for that unique charge if they seek to bring it against Donald Trump.
I think that's interesting, but I think kind of one of the key differences there, and I'll talk law later, but is that Donald Trump wasn't actually at the Capitol and all these rioters were. So I'd be curious to see how they build that argument. If Donald Trump is indicted, how would it compare to other investigations that he's also at the center of?
Former U.S. Attorney, former federal prosecutor, and assistant U.S. Attorney Scott Frederickson told CBS News this has the potential of being by far the largest and most impactful set of criminal charges against Donald Trump, at least so far. Potentially by orders of magnitude larger in scope and size than that prosecution at the local level he's facing there in Manhattan, and the federal charges filed in Miami in the Mar-a-Lago classified records case, because there are so many different threads upon which the special counsel could be pulling. Not just the horrific and historic attack here at the U.S. Capitol January 6th and what gave rise to it, but also the fake electors scheme to overturn the righteous and justified election results in the swing states, the alleged threats against election workers and election officials at the local level, and also all the money that was raised via those baseless election fraud claims and what became of all that money. There are so many different tentacles. This far and away has a chance of being the largest of the three criminal cases against Donald Trump should he be indicted for January 6th.
Well, you talk about tentacles. These tentacles are reaching all the way down to Georgia. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger is complying with a subpoena from the special counsel. The special counsel requested security video from a polling site that was linked to election fraud claims by the former president. What can you tell us about these latest developments in the Fulton County investigation?
Yeah, those reports first surfaced via the reporting of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. If Jack Smith now has reach into Georgia at the local level, at the granular level of seeking video from a key place in the counting of the votes, it shows you the geographical scope of this case, too. It's not just by orders of magnitude, potentially larger in terms of number of charges and number of witnesses, but it goes into so many different places, not just Georgia, but also notice the parallel or at least symmetrical case filed in Michigan by that state's attorney general, in which she has charged nearly a dozen people with being so-called fake electors, accusing them of committing fraud by submitting their names as bogus electors as they tried to change the election results in Michigan. It keeps getting larger. This ball that's rolling down the hill for Jack Smith, and we'll see if and when it culminates in an indictment against Donald Trump and how many different things are referenced from Georgia to Michigan to here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, Scott, thank you very much. So let's get into the legal stuff. For further analysis, I want to bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. So Jessica, we have an idea of what the possible federal charges could be based on the 3 federal statutes that we know of that he's being investigated under. Can you talk to us about what the potential charges could be?
Yes, and I think you're exactly right to say potential, because we know that the federal statutes that are listed in the target letter, just like listing federal statutes, for instance, in a search warrant, it doesn't mean that those are the statutes that you absolutely will be charged under.
Mhm.
You could add some and you could take some away. What's really interesting in these three federal statutes is that one is actually a civil rights era statute that was used in part, and this was before the 14th Amendment was enacted, it was used in part to prosecute Southern whites and members of the Klan who tried to take away the right to vote, acting under color of state law. And
Hmm.
that is a fascinating one. It's been used in modern times dealing with people who are trying to deprive others of the right to vote. And if we look at that statute that, again, deals with, it's a civil rights era statute that deals with the deprivation of individual rights, it could be the way that you potentially get the former president on claiming, I won the election, trying to rig the election, trying to steal the election without having to go into the potentially more difficult thicket of trying him for inciting an insurrection or giving aid or comfort to those who incited an insurrection. I believe there's also a provision of that statute that deals with enhanced penalties if there's bodily injury, that results from those official acts. And that's where you could see potentially enhanced penalties as a result of the injuries that occurred on January 6th. Again, it's not quite the land of just guessing, but we're not sure that we will ultimately see that statute in a charging document. We also, of course, have been talking about obstruction of official proceedings, as you
Hmm.
heard Scott discuss, potentially witness tampering, defrauding the US government. All of those we kind of expected to see, but we didn't expect that civil rights era statute. Really interesting to see if that will ultimately end up in a potential indictment.
And about the obstruction of official proceedings, Scott had said that there's precedent for this. But I was thinking to myself as he was saying that, and I mentioned it, that a lot of the January 6th rioters were actually in the building, and so yes, they did hold up the official proceedings, but the president wasn't. That one doesn't seem to have like a direct link to me, but maybe it does.
So I think it's such a good question, because the answer will be that if prosecutors do try to charge the former president with obstruction of an official proceeding, that it shows you don't need to physically be there.
Hmm.
That saying, don't let them count the vote. The votes were stolen. This was rigged. There were ballot boxes with my name on it and they were taken out, and they put, votes with the name Joe Biden back in. You cannot let this happen. And that was the chant, right? Stop the steal. What I read that to mean is you do not physically need to be in the Capitol, that the words, the actions the former president took, that would be enough for him to set in motion everything that happened on January 6th. And so you're exactly right that you need to draw a line. And my reading of the statute is that you don't need to be somebody with so-called boots on the ground. You have to be the person who's setting forth those actions.
And then, really quickly, Jessica, how perilous is this for the president? I mean, we don't know what the charges are. We know what the potential is. Is there potential jail time?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you heard Scott say this very well, that this is big criminal exposure for the president if, in fact, an indictment is filed. It's not serious just because we're talking about a former leader of our country potentially trying to deprive us of individual rights, stop the counting of the Electoral College vote. What does all this boil down to? Thwart the peaceful transfer of power, one of the things that we're proudest of in this country. But it also is the result of obviously more than a years long investigation. And the prosecution has interviewed so many witnesses, looked at so much documentary evidence. If they bring these charges, it means they absolutely believe that they can prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. The president is absolutely facing real time in prison. The question will be, how does this legal calendar map onto the electoral calendar? And Marie, you and I have talked about this before, but winning the election could be the former president's, in a strange way to say it, best defense.
Wow. Jessica Levinson, thank you so much. Uncharted territory,
Thank
I
you.
think.